Hello, co-journeyers, and welcome back to The Truth So Help Me Good. I am your host, Barbara Landry, and together we continue to explore some of the bigger questions about this journey we call life. Today, my special guest is Rita Lussier. She is an award-winning journalist and writer whose column, For the Moment, was a popular feature in the Providence Journal for a dozen years. She has also been featured her writing in on National Public Radio, the Boston Globe, and the New York Daily News, among others. Today she is here to speak about her new memoir, And Now Back to Me: Stories from an Empty Nest, where she takes us deep into her experiences of change and transformation when her children leave the nest, as well as other experiences of change, major life changes. I'm sorry. Rita lives with her husband in Jamestown, Rhode Island, where she enjoys running, walking, spending time with friends and family. Hello, Rita, and welcome.
Hi, thank you, Barbara, for what a nice introduction. I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate your book. It was a pleasure to read it. I'm so excited to have a conversation with you about it today.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, so as I said it in the introduction, and we learned from your book that you have a history of writing, including your column. Um, can you tell us a little bit about that column? And I'm curious to know how it is related, if at all, to your book.
Sure. Yeah, so the column in the Providence Journal, For the Moment, I look at that as a wonderful gift in my writing career. It was just so nice to be able to share stories every week with readers throughout the region. And I particularly loved going out into the community with readers who wanted to share their stories and learning their stories. I mean, I met, oh dear, cancer patients and firemen and farmers and just everybody from different walks of life and talked to them and encapsulated their stories in my column. I also interviewed Walter Cronkite and Dave Brubeck and Sally Ride and many others. So it was just a moment I really loved in my career. Um, and yes, there are similarities in the book because in the column, I had 800 words to work with. So I became very adept at doing an entire story in a short amount of time, space, and beginning, middle, and end. And I had to choose my words very carefully. So it's really not a surprise, at least to me, that when I did write a book, it is in that same kind of format. It's the chapters are more than 800 words, but they still are stories in and of themselves.
Yeah.
So you could pick up the book and read like chapter 9 or chapter 19. And I would say you definitely get something out of that particular story. But because it's a memoir of that time in my life, when you stitch them all together, it's about the empty nest.
Yeah. Yeah. So my podcast is inspired through memoir and
Oops.
storytelling and people sharing stories about themselves. And I've heard you say that the column and the stories that you shared in your column were about our humanity, was about
Yes.
humanity. And I certainly feel the power of that in your book in terms of this universal theme of empty nesting. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, there is a term called empty nest syndrome, as we know. How would you define that? What exactly does that mean?
So to me, I think it is just the loss, the loneliness, and the sadness that many parents feel when they're going through this transition. And I would add to that that I don't know that it's a clinical diagnosis or anything like that, but it's more just the adjustment, the emotional adjustment that you need to make when you change from being an active hands-on parent to, moving on to a different part of your life. For me, I'm just going to say it was a lot more difficult than I was anticipating. I can still remember very vividly the day we dropped our daughter off at college, our youngest, and drove back home. And I walked in the front door. And I think that's when my muscle memory, if you will, took over. Like I wasn't consciously thinking about any of this, but all of a sudden, the quiet of the house and the way her room was all neat and tidy, her quilt was folded up on her bed, there were books missing from her bookshelf, and just the absence of that liveliness that we had grown so accustomed to just seemed to reach up and grab me by the throat and
Right.
overwhelm me completely. So that is really how this book came about, because I found very quickly in the first few weeks two things that really helped me process my feelings. And one was running, but the second was writing. So I got into this habit, especially during the week, of going out early in the morning and running and coming in, making a cup of coffee and writing and processing my feelings. And eventually I began to realize, hey, I might have a book here. And then the next thought was, and that book would be an emotional guide, hopefully, for readers who were going to be going through the same thing.
Yes. And there's a huge percentage of women, I want to say somewhere in their mid to late 50s, who are going
Yeah.
through this. I mean, it's about 40% of women that age or so.
Yeah.
So
And,
it's a big
and some
experience
men.
that we're,
And
yes,
some
and
men.
men too, of course. Of course,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah, and in reading your book, I couldn't help but think about loss because change is really loss.
Yep.
And so, is it possible to experience one without the other? So, for everything that changes, we lose something. So, can you talk a little bit about the connection between change and loss?
Yeah, no, I completely agree that it goes hand in hand,
Mm,
because just by the very nature of change, you're doing something differently. So what you weren't doing or what you were doing is lost.
yeah,
So it, that's a great way to express it, because the transition to an empty nest is definitely a time of change and loss, but there's a lot to be gained too.
of course. And I'm wondering too, because doing some work around grief and loss myself, as a society, we don't really lean into grief and loss. So I'm wondering if we're even less prepared to deal with something like empty nest syndrome or the changes associated with, because it's also sort of related to aging
Yes,
and
midlife, I would say, yes.
midlife, right? So there's this whole connection, and do you think that we could be better equipped than we are because of our hesitancy to really want to look at
Yeah,
grief and loss?
you one of the things that has occurred to me, and it's even been reinforced very much so as I go out to events for my book and talk to other parents and the things they've been through. But I think there's this huge misperception about the empty nest. And I think I was very guilty of it too in society. And it goes like this. So if you struggle in the empty nest, that's probably because you never really made an effort to develop a life outside of your family and your home. And you didn't have any fascinating hobbies. You didn't really go out and have a successful career or a job or anything. You were just focused too much on your children. So that's why you're struggling, but that is so far from the truth. I've met some people that are like really, really successful and they have a lot going on in every area of their life and they are devastated
Yeah.
by their children leaving.
So what do you think that's about?
So, that's an interesting topic and it has come up in almost every event that I've had so far. And one very astute woman said, "Why is it that when people retire from their jobs, there's all this attention? There's a party, perhaps, there's gifts, there are, people checking in to see how you doing now that you don't have the job." Do we do that with with the end of the active parenting time? No, I don't think we do. So it's kind of like put to the side. And I think it would be good. And I'm hoping, and I am bringing more attention to this and having people feel comfortable to talk about it and how they feel and what they're going through.
Yeah, that's great. That's great because I think there's a real need for that too. So what are some of the things that you specifically learned and confronted um, that as you moved through this experience of
So,
becoming an empty nester? Yeah.
one of the things that was really shocking to me, because again, I don't think I was adequately prepared, that I anticipated that I would have to deal with not having my kids around. That was all I thought I'd have, and that would be enough. But as we were talking about, it's like midlife. So midlife comes at you very quickly. So like I think it was the first thing I started to realize was, "Oh, you're my husband. Yes. And we're spending a night together and it's a date, or we're spending a weekend together and it's not a getaway, it's not a vacation. We're going to start spending every day and every night and every week and every month together." And what are we going to do? And I wrote about that in the book. And it was like so awkward at first, I got to say. But, fortunately, we were able to work it out and become a couple again. But we hadn't been a couple, in decades.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's a big change. At the same time, right about the same exact time, my parents began to need me a lot more. And that was expected, but I guess I never put two and two together. It's all going to happen at the same time. So my caretaking went from my children to my parents in really a heartbeat, and different responsibilities, of course, but the day-to-day caregiving of somebody else was the same. And there were lots of things. My column ended at about the same time as my daughter went off to college, so I was like trying to grapple with what's the next step in my career? What do I do? But little did I know that this would be what I would be doing, is writing about what I was going through. So
Yeah.
anyway, and so that's just a few of the things that come at you.
Yeah, and I think that maybe even there's a perception that when we retire or when we have more time to ourselves as our children go off, that we have more control over what we're going to do with our lives.
Well, we would like to think that.
Exactly. Exactly. So, can you talk a little bit about that? Because um, there were things that came up with your parents and just other things in life, as it does, that sort of, impacted what you what you did and what was important and what needed.
Absolutely, I
Yeah.
would say that the changes with my parents were the most difficult. I went to help my father, who was taking care of my mother with Alzheimer's, and she was living at home with him. But, year after year, it got progressively, more demanding. And So I never anticipated that that would be a part of what I would be doing, and I was glad to do it. And as I write about some of the times with my mother in the book that I shared, that maybe I wouldn't have if I had been in the middle of raising kids or something.
Right.
So that was good, but it was so difficult because I think the thing is that there's this moment in time where your parents go from the ones who are caring for you and looking out after you, and even that's long into your adulthood, and then suddenly it flips and you're the one caring for them, and I felt great about it when I found ways to help them, but when there were things outside of my control, to your
Right.
point, that was when it was very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are some of the ways, based on your experience, that parents, especially moms, can discover a new purpose and set new goals in their life in this situation?
Oh, so what I would say is that the first thing to do is you got to set yourself a new foundation. You got to get on solid footing before you find your purpose and set your goals. So I can suggest a few things that worked pretty well for me. And one was reinvesting is a good way to put it in your own health and wellness.
Mm.
So you've been so busy looking out for everyone else, find something. And I think that if you can find an activity that you really like or even love, that's the key. Like I said, for me, it was running. And can't tell you, I don't think I would be around to tell you about all this if it wasn't for my running. It was like this special time in the morning when I first got up before I could think of reasons not to go running. I would push myself out the door, and it became far more than, an exercise. It was, and it still is, my meditative time. I have great ideas while I'm out there. I figure out everything from like, what I'm writing on to what I'm going to wear to, whatever it is that's in your mind gets all
Yeah.
figured out. So I never end up finishing. I'm always in better shape than where I started. So I would highly recommend it. It's helped physically and mentally. Um, Another thing, and I write about it in And Now Back to Me, is finding a way to pamper yourself a little bit. This is a
Mm.
tough transition. And I had this idea that I wrote about. I think the chapter's called Make This a Good Hair Day.
Yeah.
So I just came up with the idea. It popped into my head to go drive 30 miles out of my way to my favorite hair salon to get a blow dry. And I spent all this time convincing myself, no, you can't do that. That's extravagant. Oh my gosh, what a waste of time. You have so many things to do. And then I just forced myself to do it. And I think that we women, we just don't, we might do that for someone else, but it's hard to bring that kind of nurturing and attention on ourselves. And I think this is the time that it's really good to do that. So
Mm.
that would be another idea.
That's
And
really, really great advice. Yeah.
yeah, I think the third thing that I can think of is to kind of start building a community for yourselves. One of the empty nest casualties, as I see it, is that you tend to lose the community of parents that you were parents with
Uh-huh.
because maybe that was around soccer games or I had a daughter in ballet, I had a son who played tennis, so you knew all the tennis parents and all the ballet moms, and you went out and you became social. And sure, you kind of keep in touch when they all go off, but it's not the same, and then it just kind of goes away. So you need to get out there and do something to replace that actively, I think. So for me, it was signing up for a yoga class twice a week. And that was great for the meditative
Mm.
introspection part, but also great for the new people I met and the new friends I made. So I would really encourage that too. And then I think once you get your foundation, back to your original question, I think you're going to be much more able to find your purpose and set new goals.
Mm.
But you got to become your new you
Right.
first.
It starts within. It starts. with us. And I
Yes,
think there's a tendency to look externally. I'll go do that. I'll go be that. I'll go. But I love that.
exactly.
Yeah, that's really important at any time in life. But
Yes.
yeah,
So all of
yeah.
those things continue with you.
Yeah, which brings me to my next question, talk about any time in life. After reading the book, I thought, well, what could we be doing earlier in life to be better prepared for this eventuality that we know is coming? What could we be doing differently when we're still actively parenting, when we're younger, so that when this happens, we're not so
Well,
traumatized?
I've had a few people give me some helpful tips of things that they did, and I think, God, why didn't I think of that? Like in terms of your relationship with your spouse, many of them had the foresight to start like a date night, like in the last couple years before their kids left, and do that so that it was a better transition. Um, One woman told me that she actually they anticipated it so much smarter than me. So much, but when they drove their youngest child off to college, they also did not come home. They went directly to, I forget where it was, but a vacation spot that they love to go and spent 3 or 4 days there just kind of reacclimating before they went back into the house where they would notice their daughter's bedroom
Right.
with the quilt folded and all of that. So that's one thing. Um, I don't know. I think that the main thing for me is if I could go back in time, I would just tell myself to relax as much as you can, enjoy those little kids, enjoy your crazy dog, enjoy your busy life, and don't worry about the future so much because you're doing it now. Your future self will figure out the empty nest. So, kind of like that, embrace where you are
Mm,
now.
hmm. Nice. So it sounds like you just said one of them, but what are some lessons or principles that you takeaways that you hope your readers will get from your book?
Yeah. I hope the big thing is this, that it's hard for us to do this, but we need to be patient with ourselves. I think somewhere we have to undo maybe any societal conditioning that says this is not a big deal. This is a big deal. This is a huge transition in your life. And if you layer on all the other things that could possibly hit you at the same time, it's a gargantuan transition. So be patient. Do not expect that you're going to drop your kid off and then the next day you're going to have all the answers and you know how it's going to be. And I think we women are patient with everyone else in our lives. We're patient with our kids. It's time to turn that patience around and have it for yourself. And, just set your foundation, be very, indulgent with yourself, be mindful of what's going on and you will get there. But don't,
Mm,
force it. Don't get upset with yourself because it will happen. Just trust yourself. Just listen.
that's wonderful. And a lot of people will learn to do that more readily by reading your book because it's a great template and journey to follow because you did it and here you are. So thank you
Yeah,
so much for writing it.
no, it
And
was helpful to me too. So
yeah, yeah. So appreciate it very much.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rita.
And I appreciate the opportunity.
Take care.
You too.